When I bought the ranch house on the outskirts of Whispering Pines, I didn't expect much more than silence, soil, and stars. 5 acres of land, a modest barn, and a herd of 20 Nubian goats. That was the life I chose. No HOA board meetings. No city noise. Just the gentle sound of hooves in dry grass and the occasional bleat from Lucy, my self-appointed goat queen. Whispering Pines marketed itself as a luxury rural community, but it had grown into something else, a sterile grid of beige stucco homes and ornamental mailboxes. Still, my property sat at the far edge of the development, technically within HOA boundaries, but isolated enough that I thought they'd leave me alone. I was wrong. The trouble began subtly. A printed note appeared on my door, folded like a formal invitation. Livestock animals are not in keeping with Whispering Pines' community values. Please consider relocation. No signature, just the HOA seal and a line about Section 3.2b of the Aesthetic Code. I ignored it. The next week, my mailbox was full of identical letters. Then came a knock at the door. 2 board members in matching windbreakers, clipboards in hand. One introduced himself as Gerald Langston, HOA president. The other, thinner and sour-faced, was Ms. Violet Green, head of community enforcement. Mr. Dempsey, Gerald said, glancing at my muddy boots with visible discomfort. We're here to discuss some violations on your property, namely the animals. They're registered livestock, I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. I've got agricultural exemption, zoning permits, and a grandfather clause in the deed. The goats stay. Violet sniffed, as if the word goats had a stench. This isn't a farm. It's a curated neighborhood. We have standards. You have ordinances, I replied. I have law. They left with tight smiles and veiled threats. I assumed that was the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, I woke to the sound of metal grinding. I rushed outside barefoot. Dust curled in the morning air. A man in overalls had parked a utility truck in front of my main gate and was welding something, thick metal bolts, right into the hinges. My reinforced, double-latched livestock gate was being sealed shut. Hey, I shouted. What the hell do you think you're doing? He looked up, startled. I was just told to secure this. Orders from the HOA. Said it was a hazard. A hazard to whom? He didn't answer. I called the sheriff. They took a report, but said it was a civil matter. I called my attorney. He asked for photos. Then I called the HOA emergency line, and it rang until it went dead. The gate was sealed. No way in or out with the truck. My goats paced restlessly behind it, bleating in confusion. They relied on access to the upper pasture, where I kept their water troughs and shaded feeding areas. I could walk around the property myself, but the gate was the only way to move equipment and livestock. I stared at the welded bolts and the new laminated notice tacked beside them. Gate modification conducted in accordance with Whispering Pines Code 7.5c. Violation: excessive agricultural barrier not in alignment with neighborhood character. They locked me in my own land. That night, I sat on the porch, Lucy by my side. Her ears twitched at every sound, sensing the change. The rest of the herd clustered anxiously around the barn. I stroked her fur, my mind racing. They'd crossed a line. Interfering with animals? Sabotaging property? I wasn't just angry. I was calculating. Then I heard it, the soft crack of splintering wood behind the pasture. A few low, excited bleats. I stood up, heart thudding. 3 goats had slipped through a weak point in the back fence. They darted into the woods, wild, free, and utterly unsupervised. I didn't chase them. Instead, I walked back inside, poured a glass of water, and stared at the wall in silence. The HOA wanted a controlled, sterile community. They were about to get something else. By morning, the goats had returned. Lucy led them through the same splintered panel in the rear fence, looking oddly pleased with herself. They trotted in from the woods, twigs tangled in their coats, eyes wild with mischief. I counted heads, 20, all accounted for. But something was different. They were agitated, restless. And not just because of the gate. They'd gotten a taste of freedom. and they liked it. I spent most of that day patching the fence and hauling water by hand from the pump to their troughs, since the sealed gate made vehicle access impossible. The work was exhausting. Worse, it was humiliating. I wasn't just being hassled anymore, I was being boxed in. Late in the afternoon, I drove to town in my old Jeep, which I now had to park outside the property and hike to, thanks to the sealed gate. I bought bolt cutters, a grinder, and a gallon of high-octane resentment. By the time I returned, a white HOA golf cart was parked by the edge of my property, blocking the trail like a sentry. Gerald Langston and Violet Green were waiting, arms crossed. I stepped around them with my supplies. Out of the way. "Those tools better not be for the gate," Gerald warned, his voice slick with self-importance. "Tampering with HMA's safety modifications is a finable offense. You welded my gate shut. That's felony property damage." "The board voted unanimously," Violet said, adjusting her sunglasses though the sun had already dipped behind the trees. "The structure was deemed aesthetic pollution." I let out a sharp breath. "You sealed in live animals. That's not a policy violation. That's cruelty." Gerald actually smiled. "Perhaps you should consider removing the animals." They left without another word, tires crunching smugly over gravel. I didn't sleep that night. Not from fear, those people weren't dangerous, but from calculation. They had power on paper. Rules, fines, and procedures. But I had something better, will. And 20 very expressive, very stubborn goats. The next morning, I found Lucy standing in the middle of the driveway, staring toward the HOA subdivision. The back panel of the fence, my temporary fix, had been knocked loose. Again, tracks trailed through the woods. I followed them. The scene was biblical. A sea of hoof prints scarred the ornamental lawns of 3 neighboring properties. A ceramic fountain had been knocked over, shattered like an altar. Shrubs were stripped bare. Tulips trampled. Someone's wind chimes had been dragged down and left tangled in a pile of excrement. At the center of it all, lounging in a flower bed, was Bernard, the laziest buck in my herd, chewing on a solar-powered lawn light. I whistled. He looked up, blinked once, then went back to chewing. I herded them home, but it took an hour. And not before an elderly couple ran outside, shrieking like banshees about property values and feral livestock terrorism. By noon, photos of the goat rampage were circulating in the Whispering Pines HOA app. I wasn't a member, but a kind neighbor sent me screenshots. My favorites included, "Do goats eat begonias? Asking for a friend. Urgently. They knocked over my grandson's soccer net. These animals are trained. Who do I sue?" By sunset, a motion was filed to classify the goats as a community threat. That night, I received another formal notice. This time it was hand-delivered by Violet herself. "We're demanding you relocate the herd within 72 hours, she said coldly, refusing to meet my eyes. "Or face legal action." I folded the notice in half and stuffed it in my back pocket. Then I said, calm and clear, "You locked my gates and trapped my animals. I won't be moving them. But I do suggest you fix your fences." She turned on her heel and marched away. What they didn't understand was simple. Goats remember things. Especially injustice. That night, I watched from the porch as the herd quietly assembled near the fence again. No direction from me. No command. Lucy stared into the woods like a general surveying enemy territory. She turned her head toward me once, as if asking permission. I gave a slow nod. Then 20 shadows slipped through the trees. The war had begun. The first official HOA casualty came at dawn. Gerald Langston's prized Kentucky bluegrass, meticulously watered and trimmed to HOA specifications, lay shredded beneath a gang of hoof prints. Lucy and her inner circle had tunneled under the wrought iron fence and gorged themselves on every inch of the imported turf. What they didn't eat, they stomped. What they didn't stomp, they defecated on with enthusiastic precision. His hand-carved welcome sign had a bite mark. His $800 topiary dog, missing its ears. The HOA emergency thread lit up before sunrise. Urgent, lawn damage. Suspected animal infiltration. Langston's yard looks like a rodeo exploded. This is war. Does the HOA have a rapid response unit? They did not. That afternoon, Violet Green installed solar motion detectors and ultrasonic repellents in her garden. She also posted laminated signs on her lawn. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. By dusk, those signs were chewed in half and dragged into her koi pond. The motion detectors beeped nonstop until their batteries died. The repellents? Lucy headbutted them into mulch. By now, the HOA was in full crisis mode. The board convened an emergency meeting in Gerald's garage, blinds drawn, voices low and panicked. I knew because one of my neighbors, old Joe from Lot 17, who'd never liked the HOA, streamed the audio on a Bluetooth baby monitor taped to the window. From my porch, beer in hand, I listened. He's weaponizing the animals. Gerald barked. That gate never should have been welded, someone muttered. We need a resolution, Violet hissed. Before the next board elections. But they were too late for diplomacy, because the goats had evolved. They learned schedules. They learned patterns. They waited until residents left for work and then launched raids on gardens, fountains, inflatable yard decor. No property line was sacred. No HOA landscaping feature was safe. They moved in teams. Lucy led the frontal assaults, bold, organized, unrelenting. Bernard preferred solo missions, often discovered asleep in deck chairs or hot tubs. Two younger goats, Ginger and Clyde, specialized in fence hopping and mail theft. One homeowner opened her mailbox and found nothing but a goat pellet and a chewed-through coupon booklet. It was guerrilla warfare for hooves at a time. I never gave an order. I didn't have to. The goats were expressing something primal, an instinctive defiance that mirrored my own. But I didn't just sit back and watch. I began documenting everything: dates, photos, violations of code, veterinary reports showing stress from confinement. I compiled a dossier thicker than the HOA bylaws, and I forwarded it to my lawyer. Then I made a few calls to local news stations. They didn't bite until Bernard wandered into a homeowner's wine-tasting party and devoured a $200 cheese board in front of 15 stunned guests. The next morning, a headline ran in the local paper. Rancher battles HOA with goat guerrilla tactics. By noon, I had 3 interview requests. Violet was livid. She marched to the edge of my property, screaming about lawsuits and animal control. I calmly pointed to the camera I'd mounted above the gate. Go ahead and try. The last time you interfered with my animals, you committed criminal trespass and unauthorized enclosure. I've got video, receipts, and a county judge on speed dial. She backed away, like I was the one foaming at the mouth. Then came their last desperate move. The HOA hired a private contractor, a fencing company with camo trucks and a bad attitude. The crew arrived at dawn with orders to build a full perimeter wall around my property. 8 feet tall. Reinforced posts. A prison for me and my herd. But they made one fatal mistake. They parked their truck inside the property line. Lucy saw it before I did. The herd charged like cavalry. Tools flew. Screws scattered. One man leapt onto the truck's roof as 20 furious goats dismantled every unsecured object in reach. I stood by the porch, arms crossed, watching it unfold like fate. By the time the workers scrambled back into their vehicle and sped off, minus a toolbox and their dignity, the wall project was abandoned. The next day, I received a certified letter in the mail. It wasn't a threat. It was a settlement offer. The letter was slick, like everything the HOA touched, stamped with an embossed logo, legal language tucked between hollow pleasantries. But the heart of it was clear. Drop the public complaints. Cease media interaction. Remove the goats or face an escalating legal battle. In exchange, they'd consider reopening the gate. I didn't even finish reading it before tossing it onto the manure pile. That afternoon, I called the county livestock inspector. I had him come out for an assessment. Then I called the local animal rights nonprofit. Then Channel 6. This time they came with cameras. When the news segment aired, it ran under the banner: Local rancher under siege by HOA, livestock trapped, rights violated. Within 48 hours, I was flooded with support. Donations rolled in to help with legal fees, most of which I didn't even need, since I had no intention of suing.
I didn't need the money.
I needed the message to stick. The public had chosen their side, and it wasn't the HOAs. A week later, the gate came down. No apology. No announcement. Just one morning, the welds were cut, and the metal lay propped open like nothing ever happened. A quiet retreat masked as a bureaucratic adjustment. But I wasn't done. The following Saturday, I threw a party. Not a quiet, neighborly cookout. No, this was a full-on ranch-style hoedown. We called it Goat Stock. I rented a stage, booked a local bluegrass band, set up hay bales, and invited every neighbor who ever rolled their eyes at the HOA's nonsense. Old Joe brought his famous chili. The kids got goat rides, supervised, of course. Lucy wore a tiny crown. Bernard napped in the beer tent. It was perfect. Even a few ex-HOA members wandered in late, guilt flickering behind their plastic smiles. I let them dance. That night, beneath string lights and stars, I stood on the stage and raised my glass. To standing your ground, I said, voice carrying across the field. Even when the gates locked, they cheered. Later, as the crowd thinned and the goats drifted back toward their pens, Gerald Langston approached me. He was out of uniform, no polo shirt, no HOA badge. Just khakis and a face that had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. Nice party, he muttered, gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. Thanks, I said. A long pause. Then he asked, are you really keeping them? I looked toward the pasture, where Lucy was nuzzling a toddler's outstretched hand. I'd sooner sell this land than get rid of my goats, I replied. And I'll never sell this land. He nodded just once. Not approval, not surrender, but understanding. That was enough. Violet resigned from the board the following week. No explanation. Just a brief memo citing personal reasons and a need to refocus on community unity. Rumor has it she moved to a condo in a city with stricter animal ordinances. Gerald stayed, though he lost the next board election to a retired vet who promptly rewrote half the bylaws and removed every line that used the phrase aesthetic uniformity. As for me, I installed a new gate. One I controlled. Not a chain, not a keypad. Just a big wooden arch with a swinging iron door, hung between 2 stone pillars carved with goat heads. Bold, defiant, and just tacky enough to tick off any straggling Karens. Life settled. The goats, no longer needing to fight, went back to grazing and napping. Lucy still watched the Trillian at dusk, though I think now it's more out of habit than anticipation. I did catch her once, nose pressed to the split-rail fence, staring toward Violet's old yard. There were tulips blooming again. She didn't cross the line, but she smirked. And so did I. Because justice doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it comes with hooves and horns. Sometimes it stomps your imported grass and makes you question the system you thought was untouchable. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it lets you ride shotgun in a goat-led revolution.